Heidegger is not against technology. He just tries to think it through as thoroughly as he can. And yes, he does speak of the danger of technology, but the true danger of technology is that we exclusively conceive the world and ourselves as manipulable resources. And the ultimate danger of technology is that we less and less can even imagine other ways of thinking than calculating thinking. His thinking, after the notorious Kehre, the turn in his thoughts, in which he readdresses the question of being not from a fundamental analytics of our Dasein, our being there, but by attempting to get closer to the question of being itself. Heidegger contemplates on the historical, epochal ways in which being has addressed and addresses us in different fundamental moods, fundamental dispositions. So, existential analytics is replaced by epochal analytics, to prepare for a contemplative questioning of what is happening to us right now in our current destiny of being. The fundamental disposition of Greek culture, wonder, in which truth and reality were experienced as aletheia, as unconcealment, has changed for reasons we cannot give. There is no teleology in the history of being, into the fundamental disposition of faith in the Middle Ages, which is, with its accompanying conception of truth as revelation and the perception of the world as ens creatum, being created by God. But then, again, without reason, Western culture found itself in yet another disposition, which Heidegger coins, rethinking the hidden agenda of Descartes' methodological doubt as solid truth. In modernity, and although after the Masters of Suspicion we live in postmodern times, but the very idiom postmodernism shows there is still much modernity in us. In modernity, truth is only truth if it is certain. This is what you and I consider truth. It must be certain. Only the controllable and measurable is taken seriously. Max Planck, famous physicist, even wrote, "Only that which can be measured is real." This primacy of the controllable and the measurable leads Heidegger to the intuition that we now live in the era of technology and calculating thinking. And mind you, technology, especially as we now know it, may be a historically recent phenomenon, but its attitude, its approach towards reality is founded and prepared in early modernity in Descartes' philosophy. Because when Descartes distinguished between two substances, the res cogitans, so consciousness, ego cogito, was one substance, he distinguished it from the res extensa and proclaimed that the outer world, even our body as such, is nothing more than this res extensa, which means extensiveness and movement. Literally the words of Descartes. Extensiveness and movement. Imagine that you look at the world in this way. No longer made by God, no longer unconcealment. No, it is only extensiveness and movement. This exactly paved the way to perceive the world as that which can be objectified, measured, controlled, and manipulated. You understand? It's very important to realize this. Our modern times are prepared in the 17th century. Man is the master and possessor of nature, Descartes concludes, because it's just extensiveness and movement. Maître et possesseur de la nature. So it is of great importance to realize that technology is not something technological. It is not the sum of all technological devices. It is an attitude, an attunement towards the world, a specific way in which the world reveals itself in our era as that which can be controlled and manipulated. This is why the instrumental, conventional, instrumental anthropological definitions of technology as a means to an end or a produce of mankind are correct, but they're not true. They do not reach, which is actually, truly, aletheia-wise, happening in our era. Everything, even we ourselves included, has become a resource, Bestand, in the era of enfrainment, the Gestell. Calculating thinking prevails. It's all about efficiency, the maximum yield at minimum expense. We're constantly calculating new opportunities, calculating more efficient solutions, technological solutions for technological problems. Too much carbon dioxide in the air, store it in the empty mines of the oil and gas fields. Find cleaner sources for energy, for our growing demand. There's a poster outside. The world needs more forest. It doesn't say the world needs less traveling or less human being. No, the world needs more forest. So we just put more trees, and all the problems are solved. There's only problems and solutions in the era of technology, even in our own lives. I mentioned it earlier. We have this idiom in business world of human resource management. It is an affront. It is a scandal. Well, a scandal. It's just our era. That we just use this idiom. That's about you and me. Human resource management. It's difficult to conceive how we could get this far that we would consider that to be something that can be done. Managing humans as a resource. We are all functionaries of technology. Your life and my life is considered as something to be manipulated, controlled, optimized. We all want the best life possible, leaving nothing to chance. That's also a very interesting expression. When I first read it, this is a sentence that would never have been used ages ago. Leaving nothing to chance. That is the attitude of technology. Now, the extraordinary significance of Heidegger's epochal analytics is not only that he gives a comprehensive account of our current way of thinking, the very givenness of these previous discontinuous history of being implies as such that our era of technology is not our fate. It is just the destiny in which we now find ourselves and to which we must learn, or may learn, to relate. Our destiny is not our fate, in the words of Heidegger scholar Hubert Dreyfus. We can prepare ourselves even to new possible ways of destining to come, to become susceptible to other future unconcealments. Heidegger speaks of releasement, Gelassenheit, which has got nothing to do with a resignation. Releasement means releasing the world in its full unconcealment. It is a simultaneous yes and no towards technology. Yes, because technology is indeed our current destiny, but it's not the only possible attitude. Beyond calculative thinking, there is a more thoughtful, more humble attitude towards the world, which Heidegger has described as diffidence, in Dutch, schroom, another attitude towards things, being more humble, diffident towards things. Full of merit, yet poetically doth man dwell on this earth, Hölderlin wrote. So finding new approaches towards poetic dwelling. One of my former students became an architect, and his plea was to put cemeteries again in the center of big cities, so that the Seinszumtode, the meditation of our temporality and of our death, would not be pushed away. Now we have the cemeteries are all in the away, out of sight. We don't want to be remembered of our death. Finding new approaches towards poetic dwelling. That has not got nothing to do with romanticism. Find new ecologies of things in which things are acknowledged in their singularity. You find new, very interesting movements in contemporary philosophy, like object-oriented ontology, which tries to address objects no longer from a technological perspective, but really tries to, even in the words of Latour, found a democracy of things, and we are just one of those things. There's a lot happening in philosophy, and you are the future of philosophy, and I'm very curious what you will do with this development. So, summarizing, Heidegger is not against technology. He just tries to think it through as thoroughly as he can. And yes, he does speak of the danger of technology, but the true danger of technology is that we exclusively conceive the world and ourselves as manipulable resources. And the ultimate danger of technology is that we less and less can even imagine other ways of thinking than calculating thinking. So, the world needs you.
Welcome to First Philosophy. My name is Sonia Schwitz.
My name is Kas and
And today we are looking into Gadamer.
Hans-Georg Gadamer.
Yeah, we're really deep into Germany at this point.
And although we promised that we were done with Heidegger, it's not completely true.
You can never be done with Heidegger.
You can never be done with Heidegger. And it is indicative of how influential he has been. Like you cannot really stop mentioning him in relation to the people that come after him.
And he's a central figure. He's like a center of gravity for the course, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a center of gravity for it. But what can we say? Awee is a Heidegger scholar. That's also what he feels he knows best.
Yeah. Also, he's not a Heideggerian. He always makes that very clear. I think sticking for Heidegger for the last, well, maybe not the last time, but like sticking with Heidegger for one more time, I think Awee talks about something he also talked about in the last episode, that technology as not being something that is technological. Mm-hmm. I think it was explained well in the previous episode, but I also think it should. This is a very difficult thought for people starting with philosophy, right? Usually.
I mean, what do you mean technology is not technological?
Yeah.
What is it then?
Yes. And also the answer, it is an attunement towards the world, is also...
It's gibberish, maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think this is, and also this comes through in the lectures, but this is something that is of high importance in understanding Heidegger, and also understanding maybe the actuality of Heidegger, like the urgency of understanding. This is a very poignant idea that still carries a lot of weight.
Right.
It's also an idea that still gets used a lot in like modern ecological philosophy. Yeah. People write about this idea, how should we think of technology? Yeah.
No, I think you're right, and maybe if I could, like, in terms of expanding, what does it mean that technology is not technological? And, we need to understand that actually technology is more of an, as you say, attunement towards the world. And you can really, I think we are extremely well positioned to see it. In the last, let's say 5 years, there's been such a big chunk of various almost like religious new strains of thought coming specifically from the Silicon Valley. From the West Coast, from San Francisco, that are, weird, bizarre, right? The insane, the very intense neonatalism, it has such a deeply technological, in this sense of attunement to the world, underpinnings.
Yes.
What do you mean with neonatalism?
Yeah, right. So many people probably have heard. It is very prominent among, tech workers in the Silicon Valley. This is where this has started in various think tanks that are functional there. It's this idea that is very conservative, that, the population replacement rates are falling. Yeah. And because we're in this technological, and framing all the time, it's something that needs to be solved. They're not content anymore with, there's I mean, sociologically, this is just the so-called second demographic turn. Country becomes extremely advanced, you're going to get less people.
Yes.
But instead of that, it's being posited as a problem to be solved. And the way to solve it is to procreate as much as you can. So you get a lot of, well-paid tech workers who are like having, in their desires, having 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however many kids.
Yeah.
I mean, for those tuned in into the news, everyone, you will maybe know that Elon Musk has kind of like a bizarro, possibly undisclosed amount of children that he never maybe really talks to, because that's not the point. The point is to have the children.
Yes, it becomes something statistical.
Yeah.
And that is, in that sense, it is a technological approach, like a technological attunement towards the world.
Yeah.
That is not like, it is not the sum of all technology, as Awee said. It is really a disposition.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in the last episode. Like, and then what would be the alternative? And like, if that is a retort to stating that problem, you are still stuck in that method.
Yeah.
Because it is also the idea that everything has a quick fix.
Yeah. And also makes one think if technology can be not like, if technology can shed kind of the inframing of being technological as well.
Is it getting a free relation to technology? There is, like, for those interested, there is an interesting link between the Studio Ghibli anime movies and the work of Heidegger. There are like people who are writing about it. There's also a good YouTube video essay on the matter.
Okay.
Like, maybe we can put it in the show notes. It's interesting that a free relation to technology can have like many different forms. It is, Okay.
Maybe we need to, move forward to another interesting thing that, things that we both thought deserve contextualizing. Awee mentions object-oriented ontology, of course, when he mentions, Heidegger's impact on the philosophy that follows. And I know, Kas, that you did some homework.
I did some slight reading on that. No, it is something that I find interesting, and I don't think. Well, object-oriented ontology is the philosophy that tries not to give a privileged position to human relations or the human standpoint. So it is trying to move away from anthropocentrism, the philosophy where the human is centered. This is kind of in a reaction to like Kant's philosophy really centers the human. Like everything in the world is, we can only understand from the human perspective and is like human relations to the world. And there are currently also neo-Kantians who are like trying to we can only understand the world from the human point and the human relations. And object-oriented ontology is like from Heideggerian philosophy. Like this would go back to the episodes on being and time. But on the idea of tool being, how tools can be ready at hand, those relationships, these relationships also exists between objects. So objects have relations between them as well that we don't understand, but they are there.
Right.
And there isn't, on an ontological level, there isn't any difference. Which is it's really thought-provoking and really interesting way of doing philosophy. It is also there is a lot being published on that at the moment. It is a very contemporary form of philosophy. Graham Harman wrote a very good book on it, or a good, very comprehensive book on it. It's which is just called Object-Oriented Ontology, which is a very easy read for a philosophy book. Yeah. If you want to if you're interested in that matter. Because I think it is interesting to, at this point in the podcast series, talk about everything having the same ontological worth. Because in a couple of episodes...
Whoa. Yeah.
I think that idea gets really pushed to the limits.
Right, yeah, foreshadowing.
But and therefore I think it's nice to stick with it now for a while. Is it even possible to think? Because you cannot know the insides of a stone.
Yeah.
It's not possible. But you should also not You should allow for it to be there without like filling in the blanks yourself.
Okay, the parliament of things, as Bruno Latour would say. Yeah, another sore on Kas's mind among Sartre.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
No. We actually would rather go to Gadamer.
Yes. Yes.
Anything but Latour.
No, but let's turn to Gadamer. So we have some more context on Heidegger, and now
leading us up to Gadamer, who was his student.
Yes.
Today, we will look at the contribution to phenomenology of Hans-Georg Gadamer, who lived from 1900 to 2002, and he was active till the very end. And with Gadamer, we face a shift in phenomenology. A shift, some people say, from phenomenology to hermeneutics. Although Heidegger used the term hermeneutics, he wrote a hermeneutic of everyday life in Being and Time, so it's complicated. Let's look at what's happening. Gadamer was a lifelong student of Heidegger. His most important merit was that he made Heidegger's philosophy more tangible. He showed the consequences, the impact, the significance of Heidegger, especially for the social sciences, but Gadamer also addressed the consequences of temporality for philosophy itself, even phenomenology. For, listen carefully, there is a tension, a predicament in phenomenology, which Husserl and even Heidegger not always seems to acknowledge. If being and time belong together, if being is temporal, then philosophy as a practice, being a philosopher, is also radically touched by temporality. Now, according to Husserl, and Heidegger quotes Husserl in Being and Time, phenomenology is describing what shows itself from itself. And Heidegger, even in Being and Time, says the expression descriptive phenomenology is a tautology. So description and phenomenology are the same. This is what phenomenology does. It just describes what shows itself. But considering that being and time are intertwined, does this not mean that every description, even phenomenological description, takes place within a certain historical, cultural, and even personal context? Isn't all description historically situated and, forgive me the expression, contaminated by its situatedness? We know how Husserl tried to solve this problem by bracketing the spatio-temporal world of the natural attitude, but by doing so, Husserl just seems to shift the problem, because now it is relocated in the sphere of transcendental subjectivity, which he calls an infinite field of inquiry. But how can this infinite field be explored by finite human beings? The issue is more complex when Heidegger is concerned. In Being and Time, we find a very important passage that I haven't mentioned yet, where Heidegger addresses the problem of the situatedness of ourselves as a thrown project. Every project, Heidegger says, every understanding has a threefold structure. Vorhabe, Vorsicht, and Vorgriff. So first there is Vorhabe, a forehaving, that is a certain interest. There's always something, some motivation that directs our understanding. There is no neutral point of view. There's always you're always interested in something. There's some motivation, Vorhabe, forehaving. Second, Vorsicht, foresight. There's always a certain perspective, a focus, a particular perception that leads us. Merleau-Ponty also wrote about that. We mentioned it in Phénoménologie de la Perception. Finally, there's always a certain Vorgriff, a foreconception. Most fundamentally, the grammar of the language we speak. The grammar of the language we speak guides us towards a certain understanding. But more currently the language of the science that you are studying or the group that you are born into or live within have their own concepts, crucial concepts, which after Heidegger, because this intuition has become very influential, has become the discussion about discours. Foucault gave a wonderful analysis of how a discourse works. People are within a certain discourse, and it's very difficult if you're within a certain discourse to step out of it. So if you're in a certain science, it's very difficult to step out of this science. One of the reasons for Husserl to speak of the alienation of the sciences. So there's always Vorhabe, Vorsicht, and Vorgriff. They carry all understanding. This means, you might say, that there's always some kind of interpretation. All understanding is an interpretation. What does this mean for existential analytics? And let's even go to the bottom of the whole thing. It can also be held for the entire project of being in time itself. Heidegger has his own Vorhabe, his own forehaving. He wants to overcome the oblivion, the forgetfulness of being. That is what that's what drives him. Second, Heidegger's foresight, the way he looks at the world, is he looks at our everydayness, our average everydayness. He doesn't look at methodological doubt, doesn't look at critique, he doesn't look at dialectical speculation. His sight is everydayness, what's happening in everydayness. Then there's the Vorgriff, the foreconception, difficult with Heidegger because he turns himself against the concepts of metaphysics. He says grammar fails, the Grammatik failed. But actually he, borrowing from common conceptions, makes his own foreconceptions. Existence, mindness, revealing, discloseness, being towards death. So there's a foreconception in the entire project of being in time. Now, one may argue, and I think that one would be right, that Heidegger seems to insufficiently address this predicament in being in time. But 2 years later, in the lecture on boredom, I mentioned it earlier, Heidegger readdresses this phrase in being in time, that all understanding always emerges from a certain mood or disposition. This is the everyday analytics, that we are always in a certain mood. When we're happy, there's a different world than when we're unhappy. When we're bored, when we're anxious, when we're full of enthusiasm, there's a different world. But he adds, in 1929, also philosophical understanding emerges from and remains tied to a certain disposition. Now here's something remarkable. A question arises. What does this mean for the project of being in time? If Heidegger, looking back on being in time, and he never mentioned it, he never mentioned that this was the case, for reasons I don't want to psychologize. There is a fundamental, it's even called the most fundamental, or one of the most fundamental moods there are in being in time, which is, according to Heidegger, come on, anxiety. Now the whole thing turns around. Heidegger's writing existential analytics, formal indicative analytics of our being in the world. It's very neutral, he says. I'm not doing existential analysis. That's not my business. I'm just trying to describe the most fundamental structures of our being in the world. And then all of a sudden, one mood pops up, anxiety. So maybe this foresight of Heidegger colored the entire enterprise, which would, some critics would say, and some critics did, really devaluates the whole project. Even Ernst Bloch, not one of Heidegger's best friends, Marxist philosopher Ernst Bloch, called Sein und Zeit, being in time, an ontology of anxiety, eine Angstontologie. Wow, so if you say this, then this is just a regional ontology, what Heidegger writes, not fundamental ontology. Sorry to be so technical, but you won't get questions like this on the exam. Mind you, next week I will give you a lot of examples of questions that you will get in the exam. And I will convince you that the exam is something to really, really look forward to. Yeah. And you will. And you will afterwards be glad that you did it. There's something wrong with being in time, Ernst Bloch says. And Hannah Arendt also said this. Hannah Arendt said, because Heidegger's focus on anxiety and being towards death, Heidegger forgets another, and maybe even more fundamental mood or disposition, and that is natality, being born. The fact that we are born into this world, the wonder of a new human being being born towards this world, capable of love, of amor mundi, of love of the world even, Hannah Arendt states. These are very fundamental and important discussions. So if you take the temporality very seriously, that we are in different dispositions, things start shifting. Things really start shifting. Because does this not also go for epochal analytics? Is wonder unequivocally and really the fundamental disposition of the Greek? Plato and Aristotle said it is. They claimed it is. Wonder is the beginning of philosophy. But should we not allow shifts, other focal points or moods, even in epochal analytics? One might, in today's postmodern nihilistic world, point at the bewilderment and astonishment of the tragic dimension in early Greek culture. Sophocles, one of the great writers of tragedies, wrote in the Antigone, one of the songs in the middle of the Antigone, Pola Tadaina, which is translated usually by, there's a lot that is wonderful, and the rest is, but nothing is more wonderful than human beings. This is the song. This is how it was translated for many, many centuries. Hölderlin, who's a 19th century poet, but who is more contemporary than many other 19th century poets and philosophers, he translated Tadaina from Dainon, the terrible, the horrible, as unheimlich, uncanny. Much is uncanny and horrible in this world. Nothing more horrible and uncanny than man. So if we look at the early Greek culture, we see this anticipation on the abyss of existence, on astonishment. And maybe Plato and Aristotle were as such philosophers of reconciliation, denying this abyss of existence, overcoming it through an ontotheology of the world of ideas and the unmoved mover. So epochal analytics also will be written and rewritten and rewritten. This is not a boring enterprise. I believe that the true task of philosophy is trying to ask adequate questions towards your own time. And every time will have its own adequate, and nobody really knows what these are. But just this is what we strive for. This is what we feel obliged to do. Now, also in 1929, Heidegger wrote in Kant das Problem der Metaphysik, Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, that endliches Denken ist eine Tautologie. So finite thinking is a tautology. So every thinking is finite. This is Heidegger's shift. It is in the 29 and 30s that Heidegger has his Kehre, that he realizes that that we have to rethink temporality more radically than he had done in his early works. Now let's look at Gadamer's early studies. From the early days of his career, Gadamer stresses the temporality of philosophical discourse itself. In his PhD thesis on Plato, he was only 24 years old, so he was quite talented. Gadamer argued that Plato was not a metaphysical philosopher. This is what all the encyclopedias and the manuals of academic philosophy have you to believe. And some of Plato's dialogues are in fact metaphysical discourses. They are dialogues on the eternal world, on the ideas. For instance, The Republic is a book, a dialogue which tries to find out what is the ideal state. And there's this anecdote in Meno, another dialogue, where Socrates takes an illiterate young boy, Meno, into the bushes, And when they come out, the young boy understands Pythagoras' theorem, because even the most ignorant soul can. We are all souls that fell out of the world of ideas and were then captured in a body, so we still have this connection with the eternal world, according to Plato in Plato's ontology. So Socrates could learn Meno, that's why he took him into the bushes, to learn the Pythagoras theorem. But Gadamer points out many of Plato's dialogues end aporetically, from aporos, so no way out. The dialogue doesn't succeed. Socrates and his friends don't find an answer. At the end of the dialogue, they just get drunk and sleep together. Plato, if you look at his entire works, cannot just be called a Platonist, Gadamer concludes. Plato is not a Platonist. And he quotes Plato. The gods do not philosophize. The gods do not philosophize. Only mortal human beings do. Our finitude prevents us from ever reaching the sphere of metaphysics. So there's more about Plato than we think there is about Plato. Same goes for Aristotle. For us, Aristotle is the godfather of metaphysics. Gadamer points out that according to Aristotle, there is next to philosophical knowledge, episteme, so where the whole philosophical system of Aristotle is built on, and our sciences, there is also the wisdom of life, phronesis. There is, according to Aristotle, another form of knowledge, practical knowledge, where you again and again are seeking for the right, prudent way to act within the contingencies of your existence. So these two early studies already mark Gadamer's main philosophical project, approaching the history of Western thinking and Western culture as an ongoing dialogue with remarkable, unforeseeable, discontinuous shifts. The history of philosophy is not only an accidental, discontinuous patchwork, it is also, and you may not like to hear this, it is not a series of fixed positions. This is what the philosophical manuals and handbooks make you believe. Not true. There is no Plato an sich. There is, I hope you get the pun, no Kant an sich. There is no Nietzsche an sich. This goes against the grain of many of our intuitions. I'll give you an example just to get the gist on Nietzsche. Nietzsche, for a while, after he died, first he was considered to be a poet. People said Nietzsche is a poet. Then people said, no, he's a visionary, because he writes about the Übermensch, the way people can become when they embrace their fates and no longer in their neurotic, pity-petty life start complaining, why me, I want to be happy. A visionary. Then Nietzsche was the Antichrist. He was the great, great adversary of Christianity and Christian faith. Then he became a philosopher of life. Next to Dilthey and Bergson, Nietzsche was called one of the philosophers of life. But Nietzsche has also been called one of the masters of suspicion, next to Marx and Freud. No Nietzsche an sich. You get it? Then comes Heidegger, who calls Nietzsche the last metaphysician. After Heidegger, there were philosophers who called him the hero of the philosophy of difference, or even the philosopher of experimenting with life, Deleuze. All brilliant approaches of, not all of them, but because Nietzsche has also, I forgot to tell you, somewhere in the middle, Nietzsche was considered a protagonist of Nazism. He was an early Nazi because he adored the blonde bestie who would rule the world in the genealogy of morals. Derrida once coined a wonderful phrase. He says, let's talk about the Nietzsches. Like a pop band, yeah? The Nietzsches. You understand? But this is very fundamental. I hope you get this. We're just not talking about Kant or Plato or Nietzsche or Heidegger. If you read, and you may even notice this, if you think my classes are not convincing and you start looking on the internet, you will find theories that you say, well, I think this is rather different from what Awee Prins is telling me. That doesn't make me a liar. I wouldn't say it makes them a liar. I'm tempted to, but of course I can't. There are many perceptions. There is no Heidegger an sich, even. We're always engaged in a dialogue with the past, rereading, reinterpreting past thinkers. Heidegger himself calls this Entgegendenken, encountering thinking. So the history of philosophy is not a fixed academic discipline, offering an exhibition of fixed philosophical positions. It is a constant, dynamic, inevitable, and violent encounter of past and present. Now, this Heideggerian stance can also be found in Gadamer. More mildly than in Heidegger, but it's also in Gadamer.
So, from Awee insisting that different theories do not make him a liar, back to our interjection.
Something that a liar would say.
No, I think this is a very interesting point,
Yeah.
and also something that is, it is tough as a beginning student in philosophy to sometimes be so glad that you finally understand the thinker and then or a text, and then you go to a different course and someone explains the text and you think, well, you
wrong.
almost have the audacity to think, well, the teacher must be mistaken because this is surely not what it is supposed to be. And there are, of course, it is not a situation where like anything goes, but it is very important to understand that there are different interpretations of texts, and that there is not, a thinker never says one thing and only means one thing that can be understood, grasped, is completely true, and then you can move on, having like some sort of encyclopedic understanding of a thinker if you want to do philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think that the most interesting example of this is what Awee talked about in relation to Plato not being a Platonist.
Yes.
Which is, I told you during the preparation for this, is like one of my favorite party tricks for people who are interested in philosophy. Then okay, like Plato is a good philosopher that a lot of people vaguely know. It's like, the allegory of the cave is like vaguely familiar to a lot of people. So it is like the world of ideas is something that is brought up occasionally, and then just dismissing that. Well, Plato wasn't a Platonist.
This is a way better party trick than mine. I just kind of start mumbling about Levinas for 20 minutes, and, and then I apologize profusely, and I go smoke out of shame.
The listener can look forward to a couple of episodes in the future.
Hoping for a launch party.
But I think this is a very, very interesting read. It's like a couple of episodes ago, we also talked about this in relation to Nietzsche, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That there's a very common understanding of a philosopher that doesn't have to be the correct, in quotation marks, understanding of this philosopher. And saying that Plato ends these dialogues apparatically, so like in a position of having no clear exit.
Yeah, indeterminate.
Yes, exactly. Is then it would be very hard to claim, well, obviously this is what he believed, and this is all that he believed. I remember being present for this lecture back in 2017 when I followed this course, and I went home really excited.
About Plato not being a Platonist.
I really started something. I enjoyed that so much.
Yeah,
because it also frustrated me.
No, I get it. I had like a similar thing with this, with specifically the Gadamer lectures and the text that we had to read, which was just an introduction to Truth and Method, his book that Awee will talk about a bit more later.
Yeah.
I had a deep, stupid insecurity about, I thought I couldn't interact with art. I would be in museums and I would be looking, and I felt like something was supposed to happen, or I was supposed to perform some mental thing that makes it the correct way to view the art or to be impacted by it or anything at all, really. And I felt like I kept not getting it, and I didn't understand what you're actually supposed to do. And then I learned hermeneutics.
Yes.
And then I learned about Gadamer, and then I learned about hermeneutics. And this specific lecture, I remember after it being like, oh, it is actually about my interpretation. I don't have to torture myself with things of what am I supposed to be doing.
Yes.
I'm not per se really supposed to be doing anything at all. And I remember the forever with which I then went to a couple of museums. It was like a very like excited newfound thing that
That's
I could
so cool.
do. Yeah. No, I remember. And then I remember one of those. I went to see some Velázquez paintings. I was floored. But it's like it also gives you a bit of confidence and an approach to art. So.
But also to philosophy.
Yeah.
Like I really do not mean to discredit anything about Gadamer, but I do think that if you would ask a lot of students that have followed this course to like rank the philosophers that you found the most interesting, this would be an awful exercise. But I think
Yes.
But also fun.
maybe, but but
Let's do it now.
I think that's a bad way of talking about philosophers. But if you would ask them in like our contemporary list culture,
Right.
If you would ask, could you please BuzzFeed the lecture series?
I'm afraid you're no longer referencing the contemporary culture. Like a little bit stuck.
Yeah, that might be true. Could you if you would ask people to rank them, I think Gadamer wouldn't be too high up.
Yeah, I think so.
But because Heidegger is so impressive and also so technical. Kierkegaard, same thing. Like a lot of people enjoy Sartre or Merleau-Ponty. My partner specifically was like they really started engaging with Merleau-Ponty and really liked this study of the body from a phenomenological perspective. Husserl, famously very technical, very difficult. I mean, we still have to talk about Levinas, and so Gadamer doesn't get all of the attention from this lecture series, but I think these specific thoughts this was so freeing and so it gave me such an energy to engage with philosophy. Yeah, because like if you really read a book well, and if you have specific points that you find important or that you find very interesting, that you can like challenge a existing narrative based on the text of the thinker themselves. Yeah, which I thought that really put things into perspective for me.
I know, and this is also what Awee and then us have been preaching from early on, with the constant refrain of reading literature and reading novels, reading fiction, and reading it very closely and not taking things for granted. That's hermeneutics.
Yes, yeah. And like moving into a next point that is also very closely related to this, is that all of these readings are historically situated.
Absolutely.
That is a very important element.
Yeah. And that is, I think, maybe in terms of things to be aware of, might be the most important outtake from this lecture, because there's not just art, artifacts or cultural artifacts that are historically situated. History is historically situated.
Yes.
The study of history itself. A fact is not a fact.
Yeah.
A fact is always influenced by its historical positioning. And as Awee says, and will continue saying, it gets written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. And we all know it implicitly, but we forget it when we need to make a point. And it is very important to never forget it.
Yeah.
Because you can't, if you think that you know everything, there is no philosophy anymore.
I agree.
Yeah.
Not much to add. So let's turn to the work that Gadamer is most known for, the Truth and Method.
Let's go into it.
Gadamer was Heidegger's lifelong friend and pupil, but he was also terrified of Heidegger. It took him 60 years to publish his magnum opus, Truth and Method, and in an autobiographical note he recounts of his horror and despair, always having the feeling that Heidegger was looking over his shoulder while he was writing down these texts. After he published Truth and Method in 1960, he sent it to Heidegger. It's about 500 pages, and Heidegger waited very long to even reply. And when Gadamer finally couldn't stand it anymore, he went up to Heidegger, and Heidegger said, well, it's just spare change. It's pocket money, not real philosophy. That's very unfair. Heidegger had a very, very nasty character. Truth and Method is still considered to be the first and most important manual for postmodern philosophy. It's reconsidering all the ambitious and possible results of philosophical thinking, and it really caused a fundamental stir. Now let's first take a look at the book and the title, and then we read a few lines from the introduction. Truth and Method. Wow. Truth and Method. The two cornerstones of Western philosophy and Western science. Truth and method. You can't get better than that. But truth, according to Gadamer, he was a pupil of Heidegger, is not the adequatio intellectus et re, so veritas et adequatio intellectus et re, so truth is the correspondence or the accordance of our thinking to reality, but truth is understood as aletheia by Gadamer, unconcealment. And even this sentence, veritas et adequatio intellectus ad re, is a very troublesome definition of the sciences. It's still I gave the example of a landscape. Well, every description of a landscape, the description the farmer would give, the hiker would give, the loving couple would give of the landscape, is a truth on that landscape. So it's that definition. Everybody loves it. It's from Aristotle. Everybody goes by it, but it's very complicated, very complex. Method, according to Gadamer, normally method means metachodos, and meta means beyond or above. That's why we speak of metaphysics, so the supernatural world, metaphysics. But meta also means after. So for us contemporaries, metachodos, method, is a path inquiry that can be checked and controlled. Yeah? Method is a transparent, controllable procedure, a protocol. That's a method. According to Gadamer, again following Heidegger, method is a contemplation on a track. The first lines of the questioning concerning technology is questioning builds a track, builds a way. It's going on. We're always underway. We're always on the path of thinking. So they're pathways. Methods are about pathways of thinking. Pathways and their perspectives and their horizons. So both truth and method are considered and explored beyond the confinements of scientific reasoning in Truth and Method. Now look at the text very briefly. Truth and Method begins with a statement. These studies are concerned with the problem of hermeneutics, and he alludes the phenomena of understanding and of the correct interpretation. But Gadamer says the problem of hermeneutics is not something of the human sciences alone. It also happens in church. The priest, is interpreting the Bible and telling his interpretation to his or her flock. Or there's the interpretation of a judge. The judge has the story of not the culprit, he's not yet, but as someone who's charged, and there's the books, there's the law, and he has to interpret how the circumstances are, what to do. So interpretation is everywhere. And Gadamer says interpretation, as we know it in our lives, you are constantly interpreting. Constantly. When you cycle and you have this, you want to park your bike, and you have to see how high this is, do you have to duck or not? It's constant interpreting. And there is some knowledge involved here, even in this simple example that I give. There is some knowledge, some truth, experience of truth, how high it is, but it's not scientific knowledge. But this is the most primal way of interpreting. This is something that we do in everyday life. So what kind of truth and what kind of knowledge is involved in interpretation? Gadamer asks. Wonderful, wonderful beginning of his endeavor. And he says, interpretation is always from a certain perspective. Science won't have this. Science will say we don't have presuppositions. Science wants to be without presuppositions. And Gadamer states it has an independent validity within science. So according to Gadamer, and after Gadamer, many have shown this, all sciences have their presuppositions. Economy has the presupposition of the homo economicus. But even natural sciences have a certain presupposition on what is nature. I'll give you etymology is something that Heidegger very often does with aletheia, to show not the origin of a word, but to make us think. I think etymology is a part of stirring thinking, to show that the way that we look at things is not as inevitable as we feel that it is. Do you know what nature really means? Nature, that is the sum of all things that can be explored. Nature comes from natus, being born. That is what nature, not originally, I won't say that is what it is originally, because then I would be doing metaphysics. I'm just trying to show you that we can look at things different ways if we also look at the way where the words originated, without romanticizing this origin. The same goes for materialism. Materialism, we have this idea, a materialist. If I would say my dad is a materialist, you wouldn't like him. What does materialism come from? Where does it stem from? It stems from mater, which means mother. This is what I think the joy of philosophy is. Materialism, without knowing it, is actually going back to the most wonderful being in the world, mothers, which has nothing to do with the materialism. Well, good mothers. So according to Gadamer, even in science, there are presuppositions that should be. But he says, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to show you that there are phenomena, experiences of truth that cannot be reached or explained or touched upon by science. There are experiences of truth that transcend, page 21, that transcend the domain of scientific method. And he names three: philosophy, art, and history. Philosophy, art, and history have experiences of truth that science can never reach. I think he could have also mentioned religion, because the experience of faith, the leap of faith, or even of revelation, can never be reached by science. But I think Gadamer he was a prudent guy, and he said, no, I'll get too many enemies if I do this. So philosophy, art, and history, and it's quite revolutionary what he's doing here. Because there is an experience of truth in philosophy that science cannot cope with. And that is the experience that some philosophers, most philosophers, contradict each other, and still when you read them, you have an experience of truth. It's very easy to see. If you read Plato and you read Aristotle, there are many passages in their works where you would say they contradict each other. What does science say? A and non-A can't be true at the same time. And still, we don't say this. Hegel has a discourse on Kant's Ding an sich, where he says the Ding an sich in Kant is an incomplete thought. Kant didn't understand it enough. And Hegel has very good arguments. But if you're a real philosopher, you would not say Kant is wrong. You may if you become a Hegelian or a Cartesian, there are not too many philosophers anymore who really abide to one philosopher and no one else. I think they're making a hermeneutical fallacy. you have this experience of reading Plato, who says things that are completely in contradiction with Aristotle, and still there is an experience of truth when you read it. And Gadamer says this is how, he just wants to show his readers there are experiences of truth beyond scientific understanding. The same goes for art. If you look at an artwork, the sciences of art can tell you a lot of things about this artwork, but it can never, ever tell you or really reach the experience that you have when you watch this work of art. Do you feel, you have just a feeling? You might say Plato is having, he tells a story and Aristotle tells a story. These are two ways of unconcealing the world. Even if we would, and I would agree with you, even if you would put it that way, you would have two different unconcealments. Still, according to scientific thought, they can't both be true at the same time. That's where science, this is not against science, it's just putting science in their place. Science can do a lot. No, don't get me wrong, this entire course is not against science at all. It's just one way of showing you that science has its own discourse, its own successful discourse, but it cannot explain everything, definitely not everything. There's this experience of truth in philosophy. The experience of truth, if you look at the Cry, the painting by Munch, there's many theories about it by scientists. I once read even that is about having a trigeminous neuralgy, so there's a neuralgic illness in your face, which hurts a lot. I had it for 3 years, it's definitely terrible. And that is what this painting is about, someone who suffers from it. Others say, no, this is anxiety, this is existentialism. So the scientists have all kinds of, but just standing in front of that painting, and you might call it a feeling, and I think you're right if you call it a feeling, but I still believe it's more than that. It's also something that it's an overwhelming experience of the truth of being anxious in this case. Also, there is the experience, no, I'm doing it wrong. There's the experience of art, and then there's the experience of truth in history. I'll come to that in a second. In Gadamer, I quote him on page 22, fundamentally, the experience of historical tradition reaches far beyond those aspects of it that can be objectively investigated. And he concludes, we live, page 23, very important, the way we experience one another, line 11 on 23, the way we experience one another, the way we experience historical traditions, the way we experience the natural givenness of our existence and of our world, constitute a truly hermeneutic universe in which we are not imprisoned, as if behind unsurmountable barriers, but to which we are open. The whole thing is we have to realize that we live in a hermeneutic universe, a patchwork of interpretations, and we cannot step out of it. It's not a prison. Science would say it's a prison. I have to step out of this hermeneutic universe and go back to objectified certain knowledge. Gadamer says you cannot step out of it. You may step out of it, but then you forget your presuppositions and you just do a trick, like economy does. You just forget that there's an interpretation of what a human being is, which is not inevitably a homo economicus, and then you can build a standard model and have a wonderful theory on economics. So there is and let's look at history. Let's look at history. History is a science tries to describe the facts. Now take the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, also called the Dark Ages. You know why they were called the Dark Ages? No light. No enlightenment. Very good. No enlightenment yet. Also some say because there was a plague. There was a lot of disease. The real reason is nothing happened in the Middle Ages. There were no significant discoveries, scientific discoveries. There were no significant wars, no significant geniuses. So there were the Dark Ages, not much happened. Now there's a wonderful tradition in French historical philosophy or historical sciences founded, amongst others, by Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie. He died 2 weeks ago. He was 94, so we couldn't complain. I only have a week or two, I think. And he wrote this book on a small village in the Pyrenees. And he wrote about everyday life there. And he tried to describe that the way these people lived, the fears they had for the plague, the guilt they had, their parents had the plague and they were sent out of the village to die somewhere in some camp, and the children felt guilty. It was their fault. They must have committed a sin. They go to the priest. They try to find the sin they committed. So he's writing also about the adulteries and the sexual escapades of the clergy. It's a very, very interesting and very nice book. Very popular, very well sold. The idea was that there's a different way of looking at history. You can look at history from the Enlightenment point of view, where you only count the important events. But you can also look at history in this very narrative way. It's a narrative way of doing history. And of course you can, again and again, have completely different, this is not the place, but I'll just quote E.M. Forster, who said, "The history of the world is the history of human feelings." Wow. So when I was in school, all they taught me was, then you had this episode and this episode, that war, that king, that war, even here, this epoch, that epoch. The history of the world is the history of human feelings. There's many ways of looking at history.
So we just heard a very interesting line. The history of the world is the history of human feelings.
Yeah.
Very controversial for those who wish to believe in any sort of objectivity that we can achieve, in looking at history.
People I'm very glad to scoff.
Yeah. And I'm sorry if this is the moment of disenchantment, but what does it mean exactly? The history of the world is the history of human feelings. Of course, Awee talks how Gadamer expands on the existence of a certain experience of truth that transcends scientific method. And then he mentions 3 disciplines. And while 2 of them, I think, are intuitively, non-controversially would be accepted, philosophy and art, I feel like people accept, there's some sort of truth that is really outside of the scientific. I think our contemporary, for the contemporary state of social historical sciences, it can be a bit confusing to hear that history also falls within it, and then that history is a history of human feelings. Mm-hmm. But there's something interesting happening in Germany around this time, more positive than the other obvious interesting thing that was happening in Germany at the time. There is this, there's a lot of thoughts were being thought about how we study history. So about historiography, right?
Yeah.
So historiography being the discipline studying the methods of doing history, essentially. There's this very interesting author that I think was mostly forgotten. At least he's really not discussed as much. His name is Reinhard Koselleck, and around this time he was writing, and his whole thing was that we've been approaching historiography completely wrongly. What we need to do is we need to do semantic history. So he proposed a method in which, in order to truly study history, you need to take central phrases and central concepts and central ideas that were being voiced at times and see and do essentially almost like a linguistic comparative analysis and see how the meanings of words were changing. And at first it seems like, well, how much can words change? It wouldn't really be that much. But he talks about how in Germany, the words that is used to denote history has changed over 3 to 4 decades almost completely. It used to be just history. And then with time, in printed matter, in books, in lectures, people started shifting to Geschichte, which had a completely different tonal, a completely different undertone.
Yeah.
Because Geschichte is just the things that happen, where history implies a certain narration. And so from that alone, you can see just how different talking about history would become. Because before, it's a whole narrative from which we can learn. But then you have Geschichte and you can't learn from it. And so the narrative started emerging that, well, we can't learn from history, we can just know what happened in history. So you can see just how tectonic these shifts are, and how it is, the history of the world is the history of our feelings, because this comes from, of course, groups of societal actors, but still, I just think it's very interesting and important to look at it in this way. And so of course, Walter Benjamin would also write that history, well, this is something that Awee says maybe is too simplistic, a little bit too simplistic, that the history is always written by those, those who end up being victorious. And that is the more obvious way of interpreting it. But it's just a very good thing, once again, to keep in mind, I think, when you're trying to be a member of society who engages in discourse. I think there's a bit too much ignorance and blind belief in quote-unquote facts and quote-unquote history that they somehow are intended to prove.
And it is very interesting that also ties back into, well, not that it focuses so much on language.
Yeah.
This is also something that Awee mentions, of course, that like etymology is a way of doing stirring thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in philosophy, a lot of people now kind of associate that with what Heidegger was doing, because he did a lot of like etymological searching. And I think for some people, they have an unwilling reading of doing etymology, because it is sometimes assumed that, oh, well, if you find the origin of the world, then you find the truth. Well, that's a ridiculous notion. Yes, it would be, but that isn't the point.
Yeah,
that is absolutely not the point. It is interesting to see a word that we use and that we assume has been used in the same manner throughout history might have come from words that meant something different or that contained like a wider meaning.
Yeah.
And that can add to your thinking. Like that is the entire thing between the focus on aletheia, like as unconcealment during the lecture series. Like, you could, maybe you don't want to widen your horizon when it comes to hearing on how you could also think about truth. Mm-hmm. Could be, but I think it would be remiss.
Yeah, I agree with you.
To not allow that widening.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically for the sake of unconcealment, I once again think that we can quickly illustrate it with an example of such a simple, well, deceptively simple concept as life. Mm-hmm. The Greeks did not just have one word for life. No. It was two different ones. It was bios for something that all the living things share, kind of maybe simplified the fact of existence. That was Zoe. And then bios being the specific way of being that maybe they would attribute only to human beings. And then... So
the distinction was between...
Zoe and bios.
Yes.
Yeah. And so those are two different things, right? And then that distinction, we stopped using those words, the distinction faded, but the presupposition of this fundamental presupposition of the difference between us and all the other animals in the word life itself has remained. It just got concealed by the disappearance of the usage of the words. Yeah. And so etymology can do a very interesting thing of, unconcealing.
Yes. Yeah. And like to like wave that away or to think that it belongs to a specific line of thinking, I think you will be missing out. Yeah. Like that is as simple as that. Okay. When talking about understanding history in a different way, Awee is going to give an example that I think is you should take seriously, quite seriously, because it is important to allow these perspectives on the matter. And I think we can close the episode on that.
Yeah, close the episode on what Awee calls a nasty one.
A nasty one.
ways of looking at history. Now let's do a nasty one. Hitler. 3 minutes, not because I don't want to talk about it too much, but Hitler. Historical sciences, Ranke, founding father of historical sciences, says, we have to write wie es eigentlich gewesen ist, how it really was. Okay, now you have enough historical knowledge about knowing what the Second World War, I assume. Immediately after the Second World War, there was an enormous bewilderment about what had happened there. How could it be that this country, Germany, the country of thinkers and poets, Denkers und Dichter, evolved into this catastrophe? Then there was a theory for a while that it was all Hitler's fault. Hitler was the demon. Hitler influenced his surroundings, and he influenced and he manipulated the entire German people. He was only to blame. But then they discovered they were thinking about it, they just didn't discover it, but then their theories about the concentration camp came up. And they were readdressing problems, even taking the attention away from Germany. There was a fierce discussion, the Historikerstreit, this was called, whether the Germans or the Russians had invented the concentration camps. And then there was also some clever people who said, no, the concentration camps were founded in the Dutch-English Boer War in South Africa. So they were already older than that. Then there was someone who said, well, if you look at these concentration camps in Germany, let's focus on that. You see Hitler's Willing Executioners, a book by Daniel Goldhagen, 1996. Very influential, Hitler's Willing Henchmen. There's something in German nature, I wouldn't say that, but in German culture, which made it possible that Hitler even became. And there was another theory. The Germans have no intuition for democracy. They never had a successful democracy, so that's why there's something wrong with the Germans as such. And then there was this film, I don't know if you know it, Der Untergang, a film on the life of Hitler, with Bruno Ganz in a wonderful, astonishing role, because you see the evil, but also the madness and the human madness in Hitler. And there was a fierce discussion, not everybody knows about this, whether he should be, Bruno Ganz should receive the Oscar for this, but they said, we can't do that. It's about Hitler, we can't do that. So it's, you see, there is no, so to describe how it really was, there's different perspectives. And we will look differently. There may come a time, I certainly hope not, I don't expect it, that we say Hitler, that's the guy who really invented very good autobahn, very good system of roads where you can really go swiftly from one place to another. I don't know how we will think in the future. It's very important that we realize that history is constantly being rewritten. Some have said history is written by the victors. It's too complex. That's too complex. It's more complicated than that, because the victors of yesterday are the losers of tomorrow. Dilthey, every generation writes his own history. Wow, that is something to say. Every generation writes his own history. So history does not lie behind us. It also lies ahead of us.